During the month of tides, Empress Lucublatio, her husband, and their newborn daughter disappeared in the twilight of a nationwide celebration. May the seas lay her to rest. The month of tides is most notable for one event, a celebration of unity and peace with family. The kingdoms of Arfelitu held street-wide gatherings, the wilds of Realitas joined one another in their own festivities, and the Middle Ground Mountains acted as a shelter for wildlife from both regions. Arfelitu and Realitas have been in conflict for generations, but agreed to a temporary ceasefire so that all parties involved may spend time with their loved ones during the celebration. The act of mutual respect and peace was suggested by Empress Lucublatio of the Arfelitu capital. She sought a meeting with her Lady Cantionis, head of the Gladius family and acting diplomat for the ungoverned region of Realitas. The Empress and her lady were members of the Temple of Ruins, as well as the Order of Paragons. This bond shared between them that allowed for such a ceasefire to occur in the first place, which laid before it a path to negotiations and rebuilt trust for both regions. Born Crescentia Lucublatio, an only child and the sole heir to the Lucublatio throne, a young Crescentia led a typical noble upbringing in the region. She received private tutoring, becoming versed in a variety of topics, and learned a number of skills, including sword fighting, dancing, and basic magic. After the passing of the Paragon of Passion, the Temple of Ruins, a monastery located at the summit of the Middle Ground Mountains, sought to find a new being to fill in her now vacant role. Individuals of high empathy were noted as potential candidates, many of which had some notoriety either for accomplishments or titles. Crescentia found herself on the short list for both her current title and proximity to the temple, as members were welcomed from all regions of the world. A series of trials, training demonstrations, exams, and meetings took place to create a more detailed profile on each candidate and their personalities. Crescentia, as you may have already guessed, was selected to take over the empty Paragon role. Her inoculation as a Paragon wouldn't stop the already present responsibilities of inheriting her family's throne, a situation not unheard of for the temple's long-standing history. Crescentia grew in confidence and respect with her Paragon title, as well as the title of Empress, after having succeeded the throne. As a well-seasoned individual with a background no one else in the temple shared, it was decided that she aid in monitoring an adolescent newcomer. In enters Cantionis, a bitter child besotted with misfortune and granted the role of Paragon of Protection. The Paragons bonded easily, often credited to their small age gap compared to that of most members of the temple. Another far more important reason is the fact that both parties were native to the island. Crescentia living in Arfelitu and Cantionis being born in Realitas, whereas the majority of temple members migrated from around the world. In time, Crescentia read with the Prince Julius, newfound ruler of his own kingdom, serving under Crescentia's empire. The fellow Paragons, however, disagreed with this decision. Nevertheless, the ceremony commenced without much issue, and news traveled not long after of a child on the way. Despite the constant bickering between Julius and Cantionis, Crescentia appointed the latter as the sole godparent of her unborn child, a move equally doubted by the two parties. Of the foundational beliefs of the order, the utmost important one was to help others if you wish to help yourself. This way of life, when applied to worldwide conflicts, naturally led the temple to set an example on solving cultural differences. As such, the temple moved to ease tensions along the base of the Middle Ground Mountains between Arfelitu and Realitas. The list of notable supporters grew, as did interest in a ceasefire over a relatively short period of time. Smaller meetings took place in key settlements along the island to garner more support and input for the grand meeting. A handful of weeks before the final meeting, Crescentia delivered a quiet daughter, lovingly named Rosabelle. While mother and daughter recovered, Julius took charge of finalizing details for Arfelitu's half of the meeting. The grand meeting, promptly named Aguila, marked to take place in the middle of a 3-day-long national celebration. The venue, a coastside villa, sat snugly between its own private piers and the westernmost base of northern middle ground. Finally, the celebration began, and parties of competing interests from both sides of the island swore to a complete ceasefire. Individuals were allowed to travel freely to visit family and join in the festivities in their immediate communities. Influential persons of interest brought along their respective support to the villa, thus starting the meeting of the gods. Agula's own festivities, initially meant to be held in her courtyard, swiftly moved indoors as a sudden storm rolled in. The members, after addressing their concerns and advice, began negotiations for a permanent end to the conflicts at Middle Ground. By dusk, the storm swept courtyard furniture away. Entire table sets and decor pushed aside with no reason. After documents were signed and finalized, the hall called for a toast from the individuals who started the latest pursuit to peace. As luck would have it, Crescentia left after signing all her share of documents to tend to Rosabelle in a private room. The hall, bolstered in spirit and newfound camaraderie, led into song as the young Paragon Cantionis split off in search of her friend. What, Cantionis thought, would cause Crescentia to be away twice as long as usual. The room was close enough to the hall to be accessible, but far away enough for her to not be disturbed by the noise. Perhaps the Empress needed a break from all the conversing and pleasantries. The wind howled all night, but something about walking down the corridor alone made the noise especially unruly. The threshold to Rosabelle's temporary nursery, marked in runes of herbs, a traditional ward against evil, stood ajar. The howls, now joined by a chaotic rhythm of thuds from an unknown source. Foggy breaths illuminated by the lesser moon led to the open shutters above Rosabelle's crib, yet no sign of mother or daughter remained, save for the crumpled laurel wreath just below the window. The sudden rush of anxiety threw her harsh against the back wall, struggling to make way for the shutters. The rest of the night passed in an agonizing blur. Search parties immediately formed in spite of the intense storm. Many called for the name that would never return, and nothing was left in the wake of mourning. The Empress was gone, her daughter presumably with her, and no sign of the father. In the days following, a number of reports and orders were placed against the Empress cabinet for failing to act sufficiently with the investigation. New cabinet members replaced their insubordinate counterparts, and all involved in the court were under close supervision. The Paragon Order took control of the investigation and aided the Lucublatio kingdom while its throne remained empty. Paragon Cantionis, with little proof besides superficial memories and her own prejudice against the Emperor, formed a team of special followers to investigate all leads and theories. In the meantime, every family member, colleague, friend, and noble associate were to be followed and every move scrutinized. It would be just short of 3 years' time before Empress Crescentia was found, or her remains at the very least. The full story of that fateful night remains a mystery, but we know now that an associate of the Emperor is responsible for setting off the tragic event. Threatened with her child's life being in danger, Crescentia was ushered swiftly through a series of small hidden corridors in order to not alert the masses. Rosabelle, only a few weeks old at the time of her disappearance, would be roughly 7 years of age at the time of this broadcast, if she is indeed still alive. Emperor Julius remains missing as well, though a handful of Lucublatio cabinets still slip in bills and legal nonsense that fell in line with his ideals. A sealed letter by the Empress, presumably written just before her demise, spoke largely of a vivid dream she had. The dream depicted in great detail a shipwreck and her own bloated remnants drifting aimlessly across the sea. She also requested in legal jargon that Cantionis become the sole caretaker of Rosabelle, not her father. The letter spearheaded the popularity of Cantionis' conspiracy theory, aided in part by her team's growing social influence. And while the case grows cold and leads diminish, she still insists that more will be uncovered. Until such a time comes, take shelter during the storm and keep a careful watch over your children. Good night, daywalkers of Enno, and welcome to the City of Lights, my fellow Nocturnes. This is Majesty, the broadcasting storyteller, reminding you to be wary of the cabinet.